All right, let's just take a few moments to look into the Scripture as well this morning. It's a wonderful day as we celebrate new life and the dedication. But Matthew chapter 18 gives us another thought along those lines, or at least what can be applied in these areas. And so let's look at Matthew 18, verse number 1, and read down through verse number 7. Really a caution to us, a warning to us, but maybe appropriate for us on a day like this. Matthew 18, verse number 1. At the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, Verily I say unto you, except ye be converted, and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses. That's kind of our key thought there. Woe unto the world because of offenses. For it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. And so I want to speak to us a little bit here this morning on this issue of offending little ones. Offending little ones. Maybe you've heard this observation from William Penn, the founder of our state, or at least considered that, a great Quaker statesman that he was. And this is what he said, and we're talking centuries ago now, but it's still kind of just sort of strikes you a little bit. He said, men are generally more careful with their horses and dogs than of their children. Wow, that's pretty strong. But what a tragedy that so often that actually seems to be the case. It seems as though we fail to place the utmost value on children, various children in our lives. Maybe it's our own flesh and blood. Maybe it's others that we're connected with. But we really need to focus on this and recognize how urgent it is that we really truly try to honor our children, not just in a spoiling way, but to value them. Maybe I should put it that way, that we value them. They are souls. They are important in God's kingdom. When Robert E. Lee was the president of the university that eventually bore his name, actually I think by that time they had already changed it to Washington and Lee. And when he was the president of that university, a student came to him asking, I think he wanted a copy of the rules and regulations, that type of thing. And as it turned out, Robert E. Lee just kind of, he kind of deferred a little bit or whatever. He said, well, we really don't even have the rules written down like that. We don't have any actual printed copy of them. And so the student's kind of shocked and surprised, and he said, you mean to tell me that there's no rules, there's no regulations here? And actually, the famous general came back with this reply. He said, we have one rule. Our only rule is kindness. Our only rule is kindness. You know, really, I think that we need reminders in this area where maybe sometimes it applies to our children, and we're so quick to kind of push them off and so quick to kind of find other things that are more important. And I have to remind myself of this quite often, that we have to be so careful that we aren't just continually putting them off until finally they're grown and we've lost our opportunity to really make a positive impact on them. And so often it can be, oh, don't bother me right now. And I'm busy with this and busy with that. And so often they aren't really even that important. But we show our children that other things come before them. Obviously today is a special day of commitment for this little girl. And so perhaps maybe it's a good time for us to even focus on what Jesus was saying here about children. And really, yet I think that the application goes far beyond children. It's not just the smallest among us, but sometimes maybe it would even apply to those who are young in the faith, those who are they're maybe kind of new to walking this Christian way. And so sometimes we need to be careful about our kindness, even toward those who are, maybe they're trying their best, but maybe they're kind of new and they're learning and growing in spiritual things as well. Sometimes, I know it's a pretty serious statement maybe, but I want us to recognize that sometimes it can be easy for even good people, and I want to say it that way, good people, they mean well. But in a sense, we might say that sometimes good people are walking around with a millstone around their neck because they're trying to be serious about serving God. They're trying to be careful in what they're doing, and yet they've caused so much offense because of maybe not meaning to, but maybe standing for truth in a harsh way, or sometimes saying something that they shouldn't really even bother with. And sometimes they've brought offense to the people of God. Maybe children, maybe it's children in the faith. But I think we need to really have a reminder here about this offense toward little ones. The first thing I want to notice with you, though, before we get into all the different ways we might offend, is maybe we just need to stop for a little bit and just observe the little ones. I think Jesus started off that way. He said, "Except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." So maybe we ought to just observe the children for a little bit and kind of think about what is really being said here. What's the point? Maybe we need to observe them. And a couple of different areas that I think is helpful. And what Jesus really might be referring to, first off, obviously, is humility. We think about a child and they're not so puffed up. I know they can maybe learn those things, and yet largely the children are humble, they're lowly, they don't necessarily make pretenses, but they just are humble in their responses. In verses 3 and 4, actually the first part of verse number 4, that first part, that first phrase there, let me just notice, "Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven." We can maybe think that children don't have a whole lot to offer us, and maybe they don't necessarily have all the capabilities that someone older would. But right here, they do have something that we need, and that is a humble spirit. They do kind of come even to God, maybe in trusting and maybe even sometimes sort of a carefree attitude that I think is important. And we can get so high and mighty, and we think we've got it all put together, and we have our righteous robes wrapped around us, and then, as it turns out, we aren't as close to God as what the children are, because we're too prideful. We think too much of ourselves. And Jesus, of course, gave this sort of I don't know if you really want to call it a conundrum, but it's sort of strange. The greatest one is the least, really. The one who is willing to come as the least, they are the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And so maybe we need to just take a little thought here on humility and recognize, even for little Brianna, we might think especially about how vulnerable she is and how weak and how much she needs cared for, and yet we need to recognize ourselves that way before God. We are weak. We are vulnerable. We need His help and strength and blessing. And so we need to recognize this issue of humility. Maybe just stop for a few moments and observe the children. Say, "Lord, do I come to you like that? Am I humble?" Maybe another aspect, the latter part, I think I've already alluded to this, but the latter part of verse 4, "The same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And so, yes, as we come humbly as a child, maybe we could also observe the happiness of children as well. And so often, I think I referred to that already, but it seems like they're just sort of carefree. They don't seem to carry heavy loads a whole lot. And maybe once in a while we ought to just observe how quickly they can just kind of go on, and maybe there's some hardship, but they can quickly kind of rebound and say, "Lord, help me to be like a child. Help me to just love you and serve you like a child. Help me to trust you as a child and be able to come to you in my times of maybe weakness or despair even, hardship, circumstances that are difficult. Help me to come to you as a child." Maybe once in a while we ought to just stop and observe children. And Lord, help me to be just like that. But there's also the other aspect, not just to observe the little ones, but what about this issue of offending little ones? I know that maybe none of us would want to think of it that way. We might not ever want to think that we had offended a child, but it happens. Even I, as a pastor, I loved and cared for this little boy. But I was visiting one day, and we were just sort of making some jokes. It was nothing serious. We didn't mean anything bad by it. But I was talking with his grandmother, and just sort of joking around about what a handful he was or whatever. And as I began to leave that home, I got out in sort of the final entryway there or whatever, that final room, and he was standing out there sort of downcast. And I spoke to him and greeted him. And what he said to me was, "I heard what you said in there." And I was smitten in my heart. I wouldn't have wanted to hurt that little boy for anything, but I realized I had. Just through some careless, fun. It wasn't, again, I didn't mean anything negative. I don't think I criticized him. It was just sort of the handful that he could be and running around and boisterous or whatever. And I got right down there on my knees in front of him, kind of eye level, and I told him I was sorry. Asked him to forgive me. I didn't want to hurt him, but you know what? Sometimes we can. We might not mean to, but we can cause some hardship and hard feelings and maybe even a hindrance to spiritual things. While we can hear the vows made on a day like this, and it sounds good. We rejoice in those kinds of things. But we all have duties toward the young. Not just our family. But we have some duties. We have some vows to keep. Unfortunately, parents who maybe would never want to bring any kind of offense against their children have done so. Inadvertently, but maybe through criticism, through harshness, through not taking time with them, through going back to this criticism issue, and we're going to get to that maybe more in just a moment, but maybe causing question marks in their children towards somebody else that is in the church or that they ought to be looking up to. So God help us in this issue of offending the little ones. The first one I would notice with you is that sometimes, I think I used the word already in a manner, but inadvertent offenses. In other words, we didn't try to. We didn't even know it happened maybe, such as the case I just described. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't realize it would be a problem, but somehow through a misunderstanding or something, it caused an offense that we never intended. We wouldn't have wanted that to happen. But you know what? Maybe we just need a little reminder here this morning that sometimes, even in those situations, we need to take that to heart and immediately, as quickly as we can, apologize. Set the record straight. Try to get things soothed. Admit a need if you were the one to blame. If there was some sort of misunderstanding, just quickly take the blame for it. And don't allow your pride. We talked about that earlier. Be humble like a child and quickly make amends. Don't allow what we might call the inadvertent or unintentional offenses, misunderstandings. And then there's a second I that I would give, not just inadvertent, but also indignant offenses. What I mean by that is sometimes, even when we maybe had been trying to hold to the truth, we wanted to hold to the right, and in the process, we sort of got a little harsh about it. Maybe we got a little bit, emotional about it. There's nothing wrong with emotion if it's kept in proper bounds. But sometimes, if we're not careful, we can end up offending the little ones because we've come off as harsh. Now, again, this applies not just to the little children in age, This applies even to maybe young converts or those who are just kind of getting started in the faith. And we can just sort of lay it on the line, and I told them the truth, and I gave them. You better be careful, because sometimes, whether it's your children or it's a young convert, we can cause offense because we were indignant. This is the way it has to be. And maybe that's true. But did you know the truth said in the wrong way can do more harm then you realize we have to be very careful about this issue of indignant offenses, harshness. All right? The last one is something, hopefully it doesn't apply to any of you, but I just want us to think about this. And that is what I might call, I know this maybe is a bad way to put it, but intentional offenses. Intentional offenses. Now, it's not that we had intended to offend, but if we make a choice to disobey God, if we make a choice to let down in certain areas, particularly we're talking about sin, but even in some other areas, if we believe that this is what God has called us to, I have seen far too often where children have been destroyed for eternity because their parents, in the wrong time, it seems like the devil just works in this area, and at the almost the worst time, they've made changes. They've changed their mind. They go another direction. They back up on light. They go ahead and step into sin, and our children are destroyed. I know God can restore, God can help them through, but so often it seems like they are lost because of an intentional choice to do our own thing, to go our own way. We must be careful about offending little ones. Did you know children are watching you? It might be your own children, it might be your grandchildren, it might be somebody else in the church, or neighbor, or someone else. But if we choose the wrong course or the wrong path, we may bring offense. And I just want to remind you here this morning, what did Jesus say? Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come. But woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. Again, we have the mindset, the idea here of the millstone should be cast around the neck of that one who would offend the little ones. God help us. Verse number 6 is where it gives us about the millstone. And so this morning as we bring it to a close, I know sometimes we could just kind of brush off offenses, especially when it seemed like, well, certain people, they're just always offended. It's not my fault. It's just the way they are. They're often getting off track here. But maybe we just need to remember that sometimes we can cause somebody to go astray. And it wasn't just that, they just weren't sincere. No, it might be that we caused an offense. And let's be sure that every part of our life, whether it's our mouth or maybe our attitudes, maybe sometimes even our stand for truth, that we are properly being careful when it comes to offenses. Let's make sure that it fits Christ's teaching about the weak ones, the little ones. Let's build up our children. Let's be like Jesus before them. Let's learn from them when we can. Be humble like them. But God help us to properly build them up and cause no offense. Amen. God help us. We need our children. They're valuable. They're important to us. Let's do our very best to see them brought up in the things of God.